Welcome to Conversations with KG, the podcast. I'm your host, KG Smooth, and welcoming on the podcast this week as we continue to deal with all things COVID, all things with the revolution, the uprising that has begun, and the revolution that has started. We are here to talk about brothers and mental health because of the trauma that Black men experience on the daily, just for being Black, be it dealing with police, be it being strong-armed by the system of shaking us down of all of our dollars and just our humanity. We are here to talk about mental health and Black men. And on the podcast today, we have the CEO of Sun Behavioral Health, Mr. Brennan and Francois, along with Mr. Derrick Burton. Welcome, gentlemen.
How you doing, sir?
We're doing well as to be expected with, all that is going on. I gotta admit, it's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot. And what's so amazing to me, I guess, for Black people, we have, trauma and knowing how to survive, that's been our entire life, So it just still amazes me how strong and resilient we are with all of the traumas that come our way. But it's so normal that we don't even know how it affects us when it comes to our mental health. So having said all of that, I want to ask you, gentlemen, how are you all feeling?
Probably for the first time, I'm 53 years old. And I think once you have kids in the family, you see hope, but it's for your kids and your grandkids. And this morning I was watching the news and they were showing Bubba Wallace. And Derrick and I talked a little bit about it this morning. My wife said, "Are you crying?" I said, "Oh yeah, I'm crying." I said, "There's something I'd have never thought I would see. The Confederate flags come down. It was normal for me growing up in the South. I wasn't surprised when they found a noose in his garage. But then you got to see those guys take his NASCAR car out there. And then Richard Petty, 2 generations back, with his hand on his shoulder, letting him drive his car, was an outstanding statement about there's change coming. And I don't think that we should stop. And I guess the part that really got to me was there were people in the stands at NASCAR with Black Lives Matter t-shirt. It wasn't a majority, but one would have been great for me. So, I do feel a sense of hope in regards to that. We're having a conversation. We had 3 town hall meetings here speaking specifically on there at this hospital. And in my 33 years of working in psychiatric care, we've never had that conversation in a public forum. And it was enlightening. And I walked away learning stuff because when you have 3 generations of people talking about the impact, males and females, if you didn't learn anything, you weren't listening. Weren't listening.
Right, exactly. And KG, what I want to step back to is something that you said when you open it up, as far as a sense of resilience of our people has been dealing with since the beginning. And I think that's one of the benefits that came out of it that nobody's expected, because our resilience became because of our circumstances. And our circumstances because we were oppressed in various forms. And so I think we are a stronger culture, we're a stronger people because of what our ancestors have all been through. Because what they've been through, they had to be stronger. It's either do or die, literally. So in that perspective, we are today who we are is because of how they made us to be. So and as far as, like Brennan was saying, as far as seeing even with Bubba Wallace, that changes came about. I never thought my father-in-law, before he passed, he said he never would think he would see a Black president. But he passed, 6 months after Obama got elected. So That's changed. And so now, like Brennan, you said, you never would have thought you would saw the Confederate flags come down. So we definitely are seeing a change. So I think that's extremely positive in that sense. A long time in coming, but it's a change. So I'm glad to see it.
Long time coming. I'm glad that it's finally happening. And I just, when it comes to the Confederacy and the Confederate flag, I'm just like, why are y'all holding on to that so badly? Like, why do you want to hold on to a losing record? First of all, it only lasted 4 years, and you played one game, you fought one fight, and you lost.
Yeah, right.
Let it go.
You know, but it's all, again, goes back to perspective. That's their perspective. That's what they want to hold on to. And not to put too much of a point on it, but I think in layman's terms, I think it's a superiority thing. I need to feel that I'm better than. Right. I mean, you can put that in various perspectives and various forms, but it always goes back to, I need to show that I'm better than, the next, group of people or circumstances. And bottom line of it, below that is fear. Fear that you're really not. And if you're really not, what does that mean? What does that say about me? What does that say? So I always got to change the narrative to make it show that I am the superior.
For me, the noose and I saw those nooses coming up, growing in Mississippi and Louisiana. I worked at summer camp in Alabama. So I had a couple nooses pulled out on me because I was the only Black person that was working. And how you deal with that is very important, and manage that. But that fear is gone as far as how it has an impact on us and whether we have fear. I really think people are feeling more enlightened to stand up. I remember when Barack Obama was elected that people began to think this is the end of racism. And I remember telling a buddy of mine, I was like, oh no, it's only the beginning. They're going to come out of the woodwork. I mean, which is what Donald Trump bet on, was that they would come out of the woodwork and vote for him. But I think COVID has, as scary as it has had its blessing in the fact that you ever heard that old saying, idleness is the devil's workshop? My grandpa said that was the greatest lie ever told. Busyness is the devil's workshop. And I think people aren't busy, and it's given people a chance to think. And 74% of America believe that we have a systemic issue with racism. We don't hit 74% or 60% on anything. We're always 50-50, 49-51. And I think people have the chance to think for themselves right now because they're not busy. And I think that has struck a tone in regards to people seeing the systemic issues around race. And I think it absolutely gives us a chance to leverage that attention into something that's more systemically beneficial for us, but mostly for our kids and our grandkids.
In your observation, in your field, be it personal, be it through your practice, your time at school, or even there at Sun Behavioral Health, what are the underlining kind of mental issues are Black people dealing with that we don't know that we're dealing with? Like, Mr. Francois, when you were on the Public Affairs podcast on Magic 102 and 97.9 The Box, we had that conversation about depression and not knowing that you are going through that until, it's too late or after the fact. Like, you realize, like, wow, I was really depressed, like clinically depressed by definition. What are some of the issues that we don't know that we have when you talk and people come in to see you all that should be probably, that one should probably be self-aware or notice?
Again, let me go back to a little bit of history. We all have those family members that were considered just to be a little off or a little, they mental state seemed to be, we had that uncle they used to keep in the back room, or that aunt that were just a little strange. So we never really paid much attention to it. We just said, That's just who that relative is. And like I said, with the culture, we all have to deal with some level of depression. But it's when the strong mental illness, that's when it comes into effect. Like I said, with the schizophrenia and bipolar and stuff like that, those are the strange individuals. And we as a culture, this is the negative aspect of it. We don't seek treatment. You know, we're now getting into the age where it's okay to seek treatment. But
Right.
you know, growing up and before us, you didn't go see nobody to talk about your problem. You know, you go tell it to your pastor or you take it to the church or something like that, but you never actually brought it out into the world to be speak on it. So that's one of the changes that I see as far as with our culture, and I think it's a positive thing. But we still got a long way to go because they still have that stigma that's attached to it.
Yeah.
The word depression, though, and broke it down to the simple word of sad.
Mm.
And the challenges of being a man is tough enough, because we always say, toughen up, don't punk out,
Right.
be strong. And so when you talk about sad, that makes you weak.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about the African-American roots of finding our manhood and having to stand strong and still be second place in our manhood, it really has an indelible impact upon us, and dealing with that fact of being sad and talking about it. Because it's much easier to be mad because it looks manly. So we flipped that sad to mad, and so we acted out. And a lot of clinicians who haven't worked or have an idea about African-American identity, they don't recognize that that's not mad or anger feelings. That's really at the core itself sad. And how do you deal with sad feelings versus mad? And that may be more to a male, but it's doubled for African-American males, because we had a struggle having our manhood throughout history, because that got you hurt, that got you killed. I mean, when you think about what my old man said to me growing into a teenager, which is keep your mouth shut when the cop pulls you over. He don't want to hear what you have to say. And yet I'm a teenager, I have a lot to say. I'm a man, I stand up for myself. It's just how you feel. That's a normal part of life. But we've been told to keep that locked down, because if you express that manhood, things change. When you reach puberty and your voice begin to change and you begin to put on a public stature, you know, Derrick and I were talking about, I remember when I went from being a cute little boy to women grabbing their purses in the elevator just because I said hello, and having to tamper that manhood back. And even in my managerial career, being sure that my level of aggressiveness was intact, because you didn't want to scare somebody and people think you were aggressive. And so being able to understand what it is to deal with sad, because everybody gets sad at some point. And clinical depression doesn't last forever, but it lasts a little season. But we get misdiagnosed.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And it gets more towards the conduct disorder, because when we're forceful, we're very forceful. And for some people that's intimidating. That's not just being a strong man. So it does have a real impact, not only how we identify our treatment and how we deal with it from the hierarchy of the schizophrenia, but down to depression, and seeking treatment and the right treatment and not being misdiagnosed. It has a lot to do with our cultural roots.
Most definitely. And let me go ahead and piggyback on that. That's perspective. Again, tie that back into our culture and how we go back to how we were raised and we were reared. It's, you know, with being a man and being a black male growing up, you're taught to be a certain way. Your DNA teaches you you want to be assertive, you protect yourself, protect your family, protect your loved ones. But also in society, they taught you you have the certain unspoken rules, you know what I'm saying? When you get pulled over, you know, make sure that your hand's on the steering wheel, you know, already have your ID already out. And then when they talk to you, make sure you talk to them with a yes, sir, no, sir, and all that perspective. So it's almost like you dealing with two different things. So in a mental health field and mental health wise, what are you supposed to do with that? Because your DNA is telling you to do one thing, but then the culture is telling you to do another. And that's one of the things that we as a world, I don't think our other cultures have had to deal with that to the magnitude that our culture has. And so that's also speak to how they see it and how we see it, because we have been taught and that there's certain circumstances you just have to change it. You have to cow down to that. And how do you deal with that mentally on a day-to-day basis, not on a just every week, but a day-to-day, minute-to-minute in your circumstances when you come across, basically.
Yeah, I had learned over the years, like the whole stigma that is on seeking treatment in the Black community. That, of course, we've had it wrong this whole entire time. And then I learned that we created therapy too.
Right.
Tribes over in Africa, people sat around in circles and talked out their problems. And I was like, wow. We even created therapy. Of course we did. We made everything. We're the original people. But that was just fascinating to me that, the whole stigma on seeking some mental health guidance, how it's shown. But I will say that over the last maybe, 4 to 5 years that it has been more accepting, and you hear Black people talking about going to therapy and seeing their therapist more and all of that, and how, it's great and it's healthy and they're good and they suggest it.
Mm-hmm. You take the comparison of what you were talking about. We, as coming down through the years of slavery on the plantation, we were taught to be divided and separated. Mm-hmm. Families were separated. Husbands were sold off from wives. Mm-hmm. Either you worked in the field or you worked in the house, and you earned those different levels of trust and respect based on how well you kowtowed and did what you need to do. And then you look at your African roots. They didn't put the patient with psychiatric problems to the end. They pulled the group around them. And they built themselves around them because they understood that when your internal ego is crushed, you need external support so you can rebuild. And if you look at, we created therapy because it's on the baselines of therapy that if my brother is weak, I'm going to lean into my brother and I'm going to support my brother. Although we're being good because Tanya's here right now, we're usually acting out, but this is my brother. And in American society, we still have in the work, we're going to sit next to my brother. I need him out of the way. I need to be the only one. And that is still some of the things that come down through slavery. And it impacts the psyche so much because I love seeing Derrick here. If you saw us together, we goof off most of the time when we see each other about each other. But don't let nobody talk about Derrick because that's my brother. I hope he feels the same about me because he talks so strongly about me. Sometimes I want to stay around and hear it. But we're getting there. And that is important. We're getting there where we see each other and we're glad to see a brother at work. We're glad to see a sister at work. And just 10, 15 years ago, I'm glad you said 5 years because we're not long on that track. We were worried and saw each other as competitors, even though we were in different positions and different tracks of life. Now we see and we embrace each other. But I do think you're correct about it's been in the last half a decade that we've gotten there.
Yeah, and I'm glad for it because we are we're broken, man.
Right, absolutely. And let me say one of the things, like I said, I was listening to the news this morning and yesterday was saying about the police forces that was in Michigan. I think the police chief was saying something to the fact that they're required to wear all these hats when they're in the field. You know, they got to be judge, jury, they got to understand mental illness. They got to understand domestic violence and all this other kind of stuff.
Right, and substance abuse. And my cat is stuck in the tree.
My cat, So, but here the thing is, so again, this is when we need to, if you're right in that sense, okay, so then that you need to start with implementing services that will address that. You know what I'm saying? And this kind of goes into the being brothers and sisters being incarcerated due to no other means to deal with them except for we just gonna lock them down, which also cages, and then that's gonna perpetuate the animal mentality. So what are you trying to gain? So there's no reform or rehabilitation in the criminal system as well. So, because we got so many brothers and sisters in there because of mental illness, but they just don't know what to do with them. So again, if you want to fix that problem, if you are law enforcement and you don't want to wear all those hats, then you have to develop programs to address those programs so that way you don't have to deal with them. But that's one of the things that we still struggle with as a society today.
You know, I was watching, you know who Westmoreland is?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually have his, actually, it's right here. I got it right here. The other Westmore.
You know, he talked about the young man that was killed 5 years ago, and I apologize, I can't pull the name, but I was listening to him talk about how this young man, mother was crack addicted, so he was born crack addicted, and then they lived in housing projects which had a certain level of lead-based paint in there, and the toxicity level was twice the level, so he could not learn. But instead of us reaching out to deal something with his learning disorders, we just moved him on through. And that the way this guy got killed by the police was that he looked at him and he ran. And what Derrick can speak to better than I can because he's a therapist, but what we know about fight and flight and when we have limitations, we all want to survive.
Right.
Yeah.
And this guy, just by circumstances of how he was born, where he was raised, he was so inundated by things he could not control. His mother's addiction, him being born addicted, where he lived in the housing project. He could not think, and he went to a very primal state of run, which I grew up, that was the feeling I had, was run. But he lived off of feeling, not thought, and it cost him his life. And if you think about it, Westmoreland put it really well in regards to, if you think about, those are the things we have to change that really does impact people's lives. We have old studies that tell us when you're dealing with juvenile delinquency, the best prevention is to have programs in place from 6 to 9 p.m. because those are the witching hours in which people get in trouble and they develop poor behaviors. But for money's sake, we've cut those programs. But where did we put our money? We put our money into building prisons.
Right.
And we put our money into making the police more extreme in regards to their response and volatility of dealing with problems and issues in the community. And yet we've let those living conditions continue to exacerbate so that we're stuck into this cycle. So, you know, I understand that we're going to have policing, but we've got to get back to looking at what kind of environments are we setting up to help people thrive. And for those of us who have thrived, you know, when you look at it and you hear Westmoreland talk, you go, oh, by the grace of God, and how lucky am I? You know, with grandparents to fill in the gap, and a great grandfather who said, I tell you what, if I had a chance in my life, I'd go to school. I wouldn't be a knucklehead. From age 5 forward is what I heard. He started planting that thought. He didn't understand what it took. But he knew it would make a difference in my life. And some of us were lucky to make it out. You know, I was talking to we were talking in the town hall meeting, and I was talking about the fact that I knew in New Orleans I needed to get out. Every day you fight your way to school, you fight your way home, and just so you could go and get an education. And I knew I needed to get out. I didn't know the ways, but I was looking. And I was blessed to have a teacher talk to me about a boarding school in Mississippi, and I went up and paid my way. But that was luck and blessings along the way, because my parents would say to me, we don't know which way to go, but go talk to this person, go talk with that person. They knew how to shove me in directions. And everybody didn't have that blessing. And so it is our job to reach back to our fellow man and to reach out and try to help them look at some different ways. And that's exactly what we do in mental health. That's exactly what we do in mental health. We try to give people some different ways of coping and to look at their lives in perspective. And, you know, it is tough when you see people come in and they've just given up. Nobody comes here because they just want to be here. They are at the end of the rope, you know, and then you sit down and you listen to the stories. And just because they're in the mental hospital don't mean you can't learn some stuff about other people's strides. I listened to a young black man the other day and I thought, this is a tough cookie, man. In spite of everything, he's still struggling to strive. And, you know, where's that rope to give him a hand up? Where's that rope to say just one day at a time? And so we need to be looking at how we set the environment. So this is just starting, and I hope people don't think this is it. This is the beginning. It really is. And I can tell you that we're getting better, I think,
Right.
at being able to identify what people's home life is from a psychosocial path for Black males. And when I started 33 years ago, it was one standard, and it didn't meet the standard I knew and where I grew up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For Black men in particular,
Yeah.
since this is about brothers and mental health, with all that we're dealing with, and to those that are currently going through, which is probably all of us, what are just some small things that the Black man can do to ease the anxiety of everything that's going on, with just him living in his skin and that being, the target within themselves, like just small little things that they can do.
Right. Right. I talk to my patients about that on an ongoing basis. It's like start small, because one of the things that how we get to the mental health state is feeling out of control. So the purpose is get back in control. And to do that, start small. What can you control? What do you have control of? And what is out of your control? So if nothing else, focus on what you can control, whatever's in your realm of controllability. If you are depressed, start small. Basically, just get out of bed. You get out of bed, and then next day, take a shower, put some clothes on. Get out of the room. Get out of there. That state is. Once you change your state of physical, then you can start moving into your state of mind. So that's what you got to just start small with, because if you don't change, then you're gonna get stuck, and then that perpetuates the depression or whatever the mental illness that you're dealing with. It makes it worse. So just start small and just control the things that you control, and then add on it from there.
Mm-hmm.
My first experience with a policeman at 13 was not a great one. Just for standing around in the wrong place. And I've had a lot of great relationships in my adult life with policemen, training and doing crisis intervention training with police departments, Chattanooga and Harlem, Texas. And I still, when a cop gets behind me, lights on or off, my heart, it picks up. And I had a doctor teach me a long time ago about how to deal with that anxiety. And it was a simple plan, was just stop and zip up the thought. Get really focused and calm down and focus on the moment and how you make it feel. Because our past experiences really does impact our present, especially when the variable included is a policeman for some of us who had their first experience be a very negative one. And in spite of all the positive ones I have, when I'm in their focus, it's still bringing that anxiety up. You use the word anxiety, and that's what I can think of an anxious moment for me as a Black man. And it really works for me. And sometimes you have to variate on that, but it is about getting focused and living through and managing the situation, because self-esteem isn't taught in a classroom. It's when we accomplish things. And this may not seem like a big deal, but when I can get through that moment, I feel good. Of all the accomplishments I've had in life, that moment for me from age 13 is a very crucial moment. Still now, 40 years later. And it's important that I make it through that moment without making it any worse. That's why my grandpa taught me to watch your mouth and keep your hands on the wheels when you pull over. But the anxiety is partly something we have to manage, because it picks up our rate and we go primal, because everybody wants to survive, right?
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so going back to that ties into what we were talking about earlier, the anxiety and the stress. One of the things I keep hearing you say, Brennan, as with your background and with your grandfather, that's another thing too. Black males bringing up Black males, we have to continue teach Black men, whether it's your son, grandson, nephew, cousin, whoever it is. Most of the males that have been successful in whatever they crafted, they had some Black male that encouraged them. It may not have been their father. It might have been somebody else, but we also got a generation of male that's growing up now. They don't have that. They don't necessarily have that. Not to say they can't be successful, but it's more problematic in that sense, because some things you cannot convey in it just don't translate. And another male would understand another male. And then, so that's part of the thing that's problematic with our culture as well. But one of the things I try to do when I come across a brother that comes into our facility on a patient level, I try to connect with him where he is. I'm getting younger and younger patients that are coming in, and they're just not having the skills to maneuver through life. And so when you try to deal with that, like I said, again, that's how the stigma comes across, because just because you don't have the skill for something, that don't mean you're going to be labeled as something. But it's easier to label somebody as something because they don't recognize the skill that they didn't develop that skill. I don't know if that makes sense.
You know, studies have proven that with post-traumatic stress syndrome, that it socially freezes our social and emotional development. So if you take, for instance, even at 53, what it feels like when I'm back to being 13.
Right.
That's why I have to focus on how to work my way through the situation. And to Derrick's point is, my grandmother used to say, honey, people only change for love. That turned out to be very true. And as older Black males, just the fact that we're standing, send something to a young Black man, they've survived. Some of them are verbal enough to say, okay, how'd you do it? Okay, but not everybody. Right. Because if you hear what I'm saying about PTSD, sometimes my job all the time is not to judge, but sometimes I have to reach out and not wait for them to reach to me. And we have to get to a point where we reach out to other people and say, how you doing? Well, it's just not good. And sometimes it doesn't come out pretty because they're just dealing with whatever they're dealing with emotional. But I'm not the judge. I'm still trying to reach out because that care really changes. And little seeds, right? It's not always that you're going to see the fruit of your tree when you plant a seed the next day. It's over time, or you may never see the fruit. Somebody else may reap the harvest. But definitely that young Black man can reach that harvest when you reach out and tell him, here's what you can be. I had a counselor talk to me at 15. The church sent me to a summer camp. I cannot remember this guy's name. We didn't spend the whole week together. We spent the night before I left camp. The things he touched me by saying that you're okay, everything's gonna be all right. I know you've had it tough, but everything's gonna be great. It changed who I wanted to be. I can't tell you his name, but I wanted to be him because he cared enough to sit and talk. He listened to me. And I'm sure he was thinking, oh God, this is just a silly little boy. But that's not what I felt.
Right.
What I felt was that guy cared. And he had to be, I don't know, I was 15. He may have been 19, 20 years old. But he touched my heart on changing myself. I didn't know much about him, but I wanted to be like him. I liked the way he presented himself. I liked the way he was open to talk to me. And he touched my life and changed me. Just that, we may have spent 4 hours talking. And I wasn't the only kid in the room, but it felt like that. And I do feel like our job is to reach back. And we have to understand that navigating the conversation isn't always easy for those young men because trauma does arrest that social and emotional
development. Yeah.
It really does. And you can see it.
Wow.
You can see
Fascinating.
Yes.
Oh, we're reaching the time as to where Zoom is about to cut me off here.
Okay.
Please give the address, the website, and the services that you all offer over at Sun Behavioral Health real quick.
We are at 7601 Fannin. And
yes, 713-976-0072.
Okay.
All right.
And so, hold on, we got to do that real quick again because
Right.
Tanya just got on to him.
Right. My bad. 713-976-2273. I misspoke on that. My apologies.
And if you look at sunhouston.com, we have our other podcasts, and hopefully this is going to be on there, but hopefully you can see some of the things we do. We celebrated Juneteenth last week. I've never had that celebration in my history of working in psych.
Wow.
And we're, this is the first hospital I've worked with where the leadership is diverse, the staff is diverse, and it meets the need of our population through the diversity of people we serve.
Which is important.
It is very important. And I just got to tell you this one thing. This first company I also worked at that encouraged us by saying, what are you going to do to have a conversation about this with your people? They didn't tell us what to do. They didn't tell us to walk away from it. And the challenge back was, and make sure you get back with us so we know what we want to support in the community that's going to push equity forward. And I've never had that experience before in my life. So, that's a wonderful thing to work under that leadership and work with this crowd. Let me give you the website one more time. It's www.sunhouston.com. And the number is 713-796-2273. Man, it's been a wonderful experience. Thank you for letting us talk about our experience, because we could go on forever, because the depth of the experiences, what we learned from the town.
I had the premium subscription. We could have talked the whole hour. This is the free one. I only got
Okay.
so much time. But I appreciate you, Brennan, Francois, Derrick, Burton of Sun Behavioral Health on Conversations with KG, the podcast. I really appreciate you for coming on, and I appreciate you for listening and watching. And I will see you next time.